9 years ago, I stood in the heart of my family's cold, opulent mansion, my voice trembling but unbroken, as I confronted the people who were supposed to love me. The Voss estate wasn't a home, it was a war room, and that night it became my battlefield. I was 22, the eldest daughter of Senator Evelyn Voss, a woman whose name carried weight like a gavel slamming down on dissent. My younger brother, Julian, sat beside her, his sharp eyes glinting with the ambition she'd molded into him. They were plotting again, another election, another scheme to twist the rules in their favor. I'd watched it for years, the way they bent the world to their will, but that night, something in me snapped. "Rigging the vote?" I said, my words cutting through their hushed strategy session. "You're not even pretending to care about the people anymore." The room went silent, the kind of silence that presses against your chest. Evelyn turned her head slowly, her gaze like a blade. Julian smirked, leaning back in his chair as if I'd just handed him a gift. I didn't stop. "You're disgusting. Both of you. I won't be part of this." I expected anger. I expected a fight. What I didn't expect was the ice in my mother's voice when she finally spoke. "You're a disgrace, Mira," she said, her tone flat, final. "A defect in this family." She didn't shout, she didn't need to. Her words were a sentence, and I was the condemned. Julian chimed in, his voice dripping with mockery. "What did you think would happen, Mira? You'd save the world? You're nothing." Nothing. That word lodged in my throat as I stood there, my hands shaking at my sides. I wanted to scream, to hurl every insult I'd ever swallowed, but I knew it wouldn't change them. They were a machine, and I was a cog that wouldn't fit. "Fine," I said, forcing my voice steady. "I'm done with you. All of you." I turned to leave, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. "Mira," Evelyn called after me, her voice sharp enough to halt my steps. I glanced back, just for a second. "If you walk out that door, you're no longer a Voss. No money, no name, no future. You'll be erased." Her eyes held no warmth, no trace of the mother I'd once hoped she could be. I met her stare, my resolve hardening. "You'll regret this one day," I said, and then I walked out. The door slammed behind me, the sound echoing in my ears as I stepped into the night. I had nothing, no plan, no safety net, just the clothes on my back and a battered suitcase I'd grabbed from my room. My phone buzzed in my pocket, Julian probably gloating, but I didn't look. I kept walking, the weight of their rejection sinking in with every step. Erased. That's what she'd said. Like I'd never existed. Like I'd never been her daughter. I ended up at a bus station, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead as I sat on a hard bench, clutching my bag. People moved around me, faceless strangers with lives I couldn't imagine, and for the first time, I felt truly alone. My family wasn't just powerful, they were my world, the only one I'd ever known. And now that world was gone. I could have turned back. I could have. Begged, groveled, promised to fall in line. But the thought made my stomach twist. No, I'd rather be nothing than be their puppet. Hours passed, maybe more, I lost track. A bus pulled up, its destination sign flickering. Some small town I'd never heard of. I didn't care where it was going. I handed over the last of my cash, climbed aboard, and sank into a seat by the window. The engine rumbled, and as the bus rolled away, I pressed my forehead against the glass, watching the city lights blur into streaks. My chest ached, a raw, hollow pain I couldn't name. I wasn't crying, I wouldn't give them that, but I felt the loss like a physical thing, a piece of me carved out and left behind. They thought they'd broken me. They thought I'd fade away, a footnote in their grand story. But as the miles stretched between us, something shifted inside me. I wasn't erased, not yet. I was free. Free to become something they couldn't control, something they'd never see coming. I didn't know how or when, but I swore to myself that night, I'd make them face me again. And when I did, they'd wish they'd never let me go. The bus rattled on, carrying me into the unknown. I didn't sleep. I didn't look back. I just kept my eyes forward, plotting my next move, because even then I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. 9 years had passed since I walked away from the Voss family, and I'd spent every one of them clawing my way out of the nothing they'd left me with. It was April 2025, and I sat in my cramped apartment, the glow of my laptop screen casting shadows across the walls. I wasn't Mira Voss anymore, not to the world at least. I was Lena Carter, a name I'd stitched together from scraps of a life I'd built on my own. A journalist. A ghost. Someone who dug into the dark corners people like my family wanted to keep buried. That night, I stared at a tip that had landed in my inbox like a grenade with the pin half pulled. Julian Voss. Voter suppression. Check the Gala. No sender, no details, just those words and a grainy photo of an invitation to my brother's gubernatorial campaign gala. My stomach tightened as I read it again. Julian, the Golden Son, was running for governor now, his face plastered across every news site, all charm and promises. I'd avoided their world for years, kept my head down, but this was a threat I couldn't ignore. I leaned back in my chair, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. 9 years of silence, and now this anonymous nudge. Why me? Why now? I'd made a name for myself as Lena. Quietly, carefully, exposing corruption in small towns, shady deals in city halls. My work got traction, enough to rattle the right cages, but I'd never touched the Voss machine. Not directly. Maybe someone out there knew who I really was. The thought sent a chill down my spine, but it also lit a fire I hadn't felt in years. I opened the photo. The invitation was sleek, gold embossed, the kind of thing my mother would have approved of. Julian's name stood out in bold letters, the date glaring back at me, tomorrow night. My eyes drifted to the note scrawled at the bottom of the email. They'll never see you coming. A challenge. A dare. I shut the laptop and stood, pacing the tiny room. My mind raced. Part of me wanted to delete it, to keep my distance, to stay safe. But another part, the part that still burned from that night 9 years ago, wouldn't let it go. I stopped in front of a drawer, one I rarely opened. Inside was an old family photo. Evelyn, Julian, and me, smiling for some campaign ad. I'd kept it as a reminder, a scar I couldn't quite let heal. I pulled it out, my thumb brushing over their faces. Evelyn's cold perfection. Julian's smug grin. Me, young and naive, before I knew what they'd cost me. You're nothing, Julian had said. A disgrace, Evelyn had declared. I'd proved them wrong, hadn't I? I'd survived. I'd built something. But this gala, this was a chance to do more than survive. To strike back. I tossed the photo onto the table and grabbed a match from the kitchen. The flame flared as I held it to the corner, watching the edges curl and blacken. Time to finish this, I whispered as the fire ate through their faces, leaving ash on the floor. The past was done. Tomorrow, I'd face them again, but on my terms. The next day flew by in a blur. I called in a favor from a friend, a makeup artist who didn't ask questions. She transformed me, darkened my hair, sharpened my cheekbones, made me someone they wouldn't recognize at a glance. I dug out a gown I'd bought for an undercover job last year, deep blue and elegant. Nothing like the frilly things Evelyn used to force me into. I slipped it on, staring at myself in the mirror. Lena Carter stared back, but beneath her, Mira Voss simmered, ready to step into the lion's den. I tucked a recorder into my clutch, small enough to hide, and slipped the flash drive I always carried into a hidden pocket. If there was evidence at that gala, I'd find it. I'd learned to trust my instincts, and they were screaming that this was bigger than a tip. Someone wanted me there, someone who knew what Julian was hiding. The invitation felt heavy in my hand as I left the apartment, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and adrenaline. On the train to the estate, I ran through every scenario. What if they recognized me? What if this was a trap? I'd spent years staying invisible, but invisibility wouldn't work tonight. I'd have to be bold, blend in with the power players, and get close enough to hear what they didn't want heard. My fingers tightened around the invitation. I wasn't the scared girl who'd walked out 9 years ago. I was a weapon now, honed by time and survival. When I stepped off the train, the estate loomed in the distance, lights blazing like a beacon. My family's world, one I'd sworn I'd never return to. But I wasn't returning as their daughter, their sister. I was Lena Carter, the shadow they'd never see coming. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and started walking. Whatever happened tonight, I'd make sure they remembered my name, even if they didn't know it yet. The gala was a glittering trap, and I walked right into it. The estate sprawled before me, its windows glowing with the kind of wealth that screamed power, the kind my family wielded like a weapon. I clutched the invitation tighter as I approached, my heels clicking against the stone path. 9 years had changed me, my face, my name, my soul, but stepping back into their world felt like slipping into a skin I'd shed long ago. I wasn't Mira Voss tonight. I was Lena Carter, and I had a job to do. The doorman barely glanced at my invite before waving me through. Inside, the air buzzed with voices. Politicians, donors, the elite who'd sell their principles for a seat at the Voss table. I scanned the room, keeping my expression neutral. Chandeliers hung overhead, casting light on tailored suits and shimmering gowns. I moved through the crowd, a ghost in plain sight, my recorder tucked into my clutch and my senses sharp. I needed evidence, something concrete to tie Julian to the voter suppression rumors. If it was here, I'd find it. I spotted him first, Julian, standing near the center of the room, laughing with a group of men in expensive ties. He'd grown into his ambition, his jaw sharper, his posture radiating confidence. Governor Voss, they'd call him soon if he got his way. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to keep moving, slipping closer to the edges of his circle. I caught fragments of conversation, fundraising numbers, polling data. Nothing damning yet. I needed more. Then I saw her. Evelyn. My mother stood across the room, a glass of champagne in her hand, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. She hadn't aged, she'd hardened, her presence commanding even from a distance. Our eyes didn't meet, but I felt her all the same, a weight I couldn't shake. I turned away, focusing on a cluster of aides near the bar. They were young, nervous, the kind who'd spill secrets if you listened long enough. I sidled up, pretending to adjust my clutch, and caught their hushed words. "The rolls are set," one said, his voice low. "Districts 3 and 7, cleaned up nice." Another nodded, glancing around. "Boss says no loose ends this time." My pulse quickened. Voter rolls. Districts. This was it, the thread I'd been chasing. I clicked the recorder on, keeping my movements subtle, and leaned closer as they kept talking. "If this gets out, we're done," the first one muttered. "Julian's orders, burn the backups after tonight." I had it. Proof, or close enough to dig deeper. I slipped the recorder back into my clutch and grabbed the flash drive from my pocket, transferring the audio with a quick press. My hands shook slightly, but I steadied them. I needed to get out before anyone noticed me lingering too long. I turned to leave, weaving through the crowd, when a voice sliced through the noise like a knife. "What's this failure doing here?" I froze. Evelyn's words hit me like a slap, her tone as cold as I remembered. I turned slowly, meeting her gaze across the room. She'd spotted me. How? I didn't know. My disguise was good, but maybe a mother's instinct cut through it. Or maybe she just sensed weakness, like always. The crowd parted slightly, heads turning to see who she was glaring at. I straightened, refusing to flinch. Julian stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he took me in. "You don't belong with us anymore," he said, his voice loud enough to draw more attention. "Get out." His smirk was back, the same one he'd worn 9 years ago when they'd cast me aside. "Ökult veran." I could have slipped away, evidence in hand, and let them think they'd won again. But something in me snapped, the same fire that had pushed me out that door all those years back. I took a step closer, my heart pounding but my face calm. "You sure about that?" I said, my voice steady, loud enough for the onlookers to hear. Whispers rippled through the room. Evelyn's expression didn't change, but I saw the flicker in her eyes, confusion, maybe anger. Julian opened his mouth to retort, but I didn't give him the chance. I held their stares, letting the moment stretch, the tension coiling tighter. They didn't know me anymore. They didn't know what I'd become. I'd walked in here to expose them, but now, standing in their spotlight, I realized this wasn't just about evidence. It was personal. My exile had made me invisible to them, but tonight, I'd make them see me, one way or another. I turned to go, my mind racing with what came next. I'd gotten what I needed, but Evelyn's words echoed in my head, taunting me. Failure. Disgrace. I was almost to the door when I heard footsteps behind me, someone closing in. I didn't look back. Not yet. Whatever happened now, I was ready. They'd underestimated me for the last time. I'd almost made it to the door when the chaos erupted behind me. Evelyn's voice had already lit the fuse, and Julian's taunt had fanned the flames, but I hadn't expected the explosion to come so fast. I turned just as a man stepped forward from the crowd, Marcus Kane, Julian's chief advisor, his face pale and his eyes wide with something I couldn't place. He'd been a shadow in their operation, a name I'd seen in my research but never met. Now he was staring at me like I'd just pulled a gun. "How dare you?" he started, his voice cutting through the murmurs. He pointed at me, then faltered, as if the words caught in his throat. The room went still, every head swiveling between us. Evelyn's glare sharpened, and Julian's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of unease. I didn't wait for Marcus to finish. I stepped forward, my heart hammering but my smile calm, and said, "You really have no clue, do you?" The question hung there, a challenge I hadn't planned but couldn't take back. I reached into my clutch, my fingers brushing the flash drive as I locked eyes with my family. 9 years of silence, of scraping by, of building myself into something they'd never understand, it all boiled down to This moment, I wasn't just Mira Voss anymore, the girl they'd thrown away. I was Lena Carter, the shadow who'd been unraveling their lies from the outside. And they were about to find out. "Recognize me now?" I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. I pulled out the flash drive and held it up, small but lethal in the light. Or maybe this will help. I'd tipped off a few trusted reporters earlier that day, insurance in case things went sideways. Now, I pressed the button on the tiny transmitter I'd rigged to it, sending the audio I'd recorded straight to their feeds. Within seconds, the massive screens behind Julian, meant to loop his campaign slogans, flickered. Then the voices came, his aides clear as day, talking about cleaned-up voter rolls and no loose ends. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, the clatter of dropped glasses. Chaos swallowed the Gala whole. I watched Julian's face twist, his charm crumbling as he spun toward the screens, then back to me. "What the hell did you do?" he snarled, lunging forward. But Marcus grabbed his arm, holding him back, his own expression a mix of shock and something else. Respect, maybe, or fear. Evelyn didn't move. She stood there, statue still, her champagne glass trembling in her hand. "You," she whispered, the first crack I'd ever seen in her armor. I met her gaze, unflinching. "Me," I said simply. "The failure. The disgrace. Turns out I'm not so easy to erase." Reporters swarmed in from the edges of the room, my allies, right on cue. Phones lit up, cameras flashed, and the aides' voices kept playing, a damning loop that drowned out Julian's attempts to shout over it. "This is a setup," he yelled, but no one was listening. The donors he'd courted all night started slipping toward the exits, their faces tight with panic. The Voss empire, so carefully built, was cracking apart in real time. I could have stayed, could have twisted the knife deeper, but I'd done what I came to do. I turned and started for the door again, the crowd parting like I was something dangerous. Maybe I was. Marcus's voice followed me, quieter now. "Mira, wait." I didn't stop. I didn't owe him anything, not even a glance. But I heard the awe in his tone, the realization of who I'd become. It didn't matter. This wasn't about him, or even them, it was about me. I pushed through the double doors and stepped into the night, the cool air hitting my face like a slap. Behind me, the Gala dissolved into a shouting match, Julian's team scrambling, Evelyn's silence louder than any words. My legs shook as I walked down the path, but I kept going, the flash drive still clenched in my hand. I'd done it. I'd walked into their world and torn it down, piece by piece. The evidence was out there now, unstoppable, and they'd have to face the consequences. I stopped at the edge of the estate, looking back one last time. The lights blazed, but the illusion was gone. They weren't invincible. They never had been. I'd just been too young to see it. Now they'd never forget it. I slipped the flash drive into my pocket and kept walking, my mind already racing ahead. The story wasn't over, not for them, not for me. But tonight I'd won. As I disappeared into the shadows, I heard the distant wail of sirens. The press, the law, someone would pick up the pieces. I didn't care who. I'd given them the truth, and that was enough. For the first time in 9 years, I felt light, like the weight of their rejection had finally lifted. They'd tried to break me, but I'd broken them instead. And I wasn't done yet. The morning after the Gala, I sat in a quiet cafe, the city humming outside the window as if nothing had changed. My coffee steamed in front of me, untouched, while the TV above the counter blared the fallout I'd unleashed. Voss campaign collapses amid scandal, the ticker read, followed by grainy footage of Julian's team being swarmed by reporters. I watched it all unfold, my face blank but my chest tight. 9 years of exile, of fighting to be something more than their discard, had led me here. I'd won, but victory didn't feel like I'd imagined. The night before replayed in my head, sharp and relentless. Evelyn's whispered, "You." As I'd walked past her, the crack in her voice the closest she'd ever come to admitting defeat. Julian's rage, his polished mask slipping as the screens betrayed him. Marcus's stunned gaze, like he'd seen a ghost rise from the grave. I'd left them speechless, their empire crumbling in my wake. And yet, as I sat there, I didn't feel triumph. I felt empty. Not regret, just a hollow space where their hold on me used to be. I pulled my phone from my pocket, scrolling through the headlines. Anonymous journalist exposes voter fraud. Voss family faces investigation. My name, Lena Carter, was everywhere, but Mira Voss stayed buried, a secret I'd keep for now. The flash drive sat on the table, its weight a reminder of what I'd done. I'd handed the evidence to the right people before slipping away from the estate, and the dominoes had fallen fast. Julian's campaign was dead, Evelyn's legacy was tainted. The machine they'd built was grinding to a halt, and I'd been the one to pull the lever. A message popped up on my screen. Marcus Kane. We need to talk. You've changed everything. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the reply button. He'd seen me, really seen me, in a way my family never had. Part of me wondered what he wanted. Alliance, answers, something else. But I deleted it without responding. I didn't need his validation or anyone's. I'd spent too long chasing shadows of approval. Now I was done. The cafe door chimed, and a woman sat down a few tables away, her eyes flicking to the TV. Can you believe it? She said to no one in particular. Those Voss people thought they were untouchable. I hid a faint smile behind my hand. Untouchable. That's what I'd believed too once. But I'd proven them wrong, not with their games, but with the truth. It wasn't loud or flashy. It was quiet, steady, and sharper than any weapon they'd ever wielded. I leaned back in my chair, finally taking a sip of the coffee. It was bitter, grounding me in the moment. The past 9 years flashed through my mind. Nights in cheap motels, days hunched over a laptop, every story I'd chased to claw my way back. I told myself it was about justice, about giving a voice to the powerless, but deep down, I knew it was about them too. About proving I wasn't nothing. Last night, I'd done that. So why didn't it feel like enough? Maybe because it wasn't the end. I'd torn down their world, but mine was still unfolding. I'd spent so long running from their shadow that I hadn't stopped to see what I could build without it. The thought settled in me, heavy but not unwelcome. I wasn't just Lena Carter, the journalist who'd toppled a dynasty. I was Mira Voss, the girl who'd survived, who'd turned her exile into a weapon. And I wasn't finished. I stood, leaving a tip on the table, and stepped outside. The sun was rising, painting the city in gold, and for the first time in years I felt free. Not from them, they'd always be a scar, but from the need to prove anything to them. I walked down the street, my pace steady, my mind already turning to the next story. There'd always be another fight, another truth to chase. That's who I was now. As I disappeared into the crowd, I smiled faintly to myself. They'll never silence me again, I thought, and I meant it. The Voss name might have shaped me, but it didn't own me anymore. I did. Hey, if you've made it this far, thanks for sticking with Myra's journey. What did you think of her fight back? Drop a comment below. Did she get the justice she deserved, or should she have gone even harder? And if you want more stories like this, hit that subscribe button and let's keep the conversation going.